We're going to begin with an opening today, a very special opening that brings us into thinking about where diversity begins in this country called Canada. Of course, it was already very diverse before it ever got to be called that. So I have asked Jeff Monaig, who is from the Beausoleil First Nation and who has served as an instructor for the Anishinaabemowin language, Anishinaabe language, Anishinaabemowin, with children from junior kindergarten right up to post-secondary education. He's also served as chief and counselor of his community and has been very much involved in the treaty process. But Jeff will bring us to a good spot, a good opening, so that we can begin our serious thinking about how diversity will be carried forward as we bring a new Bachelor of Education into existence and as we honor the memory of Patrick Solomon and all of the legacy that he has brought with him. Jeff, to you.
Thank you, Celia, for the introduction. I'm going to start off with a teaching. And first of all, I'll introduce myself and I'll use my language. I'm Bojo Kinawaya, Maingan Nishnakaz, Miuda Nake Kwed Nong. My name is Maingan. In my language, that means the wolf. It was a name that was given to me when I was a young child. It's a name that I carried all through my life. I was also given my other name, my Indian Act name, which is Jeff Monaig. That's my Canadian name. And I want to start things off tonight with just a short blessing in my language. I'll also translate into English. But I first begin with a teaching on this eagle feather. This is what we do in my community. I'm an Ojibwe, also known as Anishinaabe. And the Ojibwe people, or the Anishinaabek, as they are called, often begin any presentation with a teaching. It's part of what we learn to do as young people. And when we get older, we get very good at it, hopefully. This eagle feather represents a lot of things in my community, in my culture. The first thing is that it's an honor to have received an eagle feather. I received this eagle feather because of service to my community. Many, many years of service to my own community as a leader, as a chief, as a counselor, and also as a teacher, where I taught my own language. But I've also served in the Canadian Forces for 10 years, and that's part of why I received this as well. It's all part of service to the community. But this eagle feather represents other things. When I hold it, I speak only the truth. And that's what we're asked to do all the time. This is an important thing because only recently I was part of a judicial process where Canada is examining a land claim that we have submitted on behalf of our people for 300 square kilometers of Ontario. It's known as the Williams Treaty. And as I was asked to testify, I used the eagle feather to swear my oath that I was going to be telling the truth. And the courts, for the first time ever, allowed that to happen because we made that request. That hadn't been the case for a long, long time. And I think that things are changing in that sense that we're making some progress in Canada to have that happen. But this eagle feather also is used when we do our ceremonies. when we use our smudging of our sacred gifts that were given from the Creator, one of them being sage, another one being sweetgrass. We burn these as part of our ceremonies. And when we do that, we spread the smoke around using our eagle feather. And it is said that we do this because the eagle flies the highest and can communicate the best with our Creator on our behalf. And that's why we do that. There's my teaching. Now for our blessing. Aimikwich, Gemnido, Gimdongoyan Manongo, Mingan Nin Dishikaz, Jimiwich Konongominoa, Gibnagishguk, Gigbiwan, Nishin Swingoyo, Nishin Gugego, Kinawayama Nongo Gibajat, Jimigwich Kokineo, Ijitchgain. I ask the Creator, and I say to the Creator, however we may understand our Creator to be, to assist us here tonight, so that good things may happen, so that we can only speak the truth when we speak. And we thank Him for the good day that we had today, because it was a good day, even though it rained. And don't blame me for that, please. Even though it rained, that's still a good thing for us. That's still a good thing for our earth. And it helps to connect us. And I say thank you to the Creator for bringing us all here together this evening. Oh, Miigwech, thank you very much.
So I'm sure she needs no introduction, but we are very delighted to have Beverly Jean Daniel, who has agreed to serve as the MC. I don't want to say whether it's master or mistress or whatever it is. The MC for the evening. And thanks, Beverly, and we'll be looking forward to all you have to tell us.
Thank you. Good evening, everyone. Good evening, everyone. Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. As you see, we do have a lovely agenda ahead of us. We're going to have the Dean give us some greetings soon. We're also going to have Professor Hyacinth Evans spending some time with us, and we're also going to have a panel. Am I not using the mic? Does that help? Great. But as we go through the evening, I'm asking if you could think about a couple of things as you listen to the speakers and the panel. Mr. Monet talks about the importance of speaking the truth. And he talks about the role that the eagle feather plays and the importance of vision. And as we talk about equity and inclusion, I want you to think about what are the truths that we refer to when we use those terms. Whose truths are we talking about when we use those terms? And as well, what are the long-term consequences when we deploy those terms in ways that can be seen as superficial without any informed interrogation around whose bodies are affected, which communities are affected when we deploy those terms in ways that are uncritical and maybe based on sort of short-term analysis of needs. So as the evening goes on and we've got our speakers present, I'm asking if you can think about some of those terms. So the next person that is going to spend some time with us is Dean of the Faculty of Education, Mr. Ron Austin, to give greetings from the faculty.
Thank you, Beverly, and good evening, everyone, as well. Okay. On behalf of the Faculty of Education and York University as well, I'd like to welcome you to the 2015 York Center for Education and Community Annual Lecture. I want to extend a particularly warm welcome to those of you who are graduates of our BED program, and I know many of you are here. Put up your hands, it's curious. Two, three, oh yeah, over there, at least 5 of us, maybe half a dozen of us, yeah, as well as our master's program. Are there graduates from our master's program here? another 3 or 4 here, maybe about to graduate. I see a hand partly going up. So, but welcome to you, and obviously welcome to Dr. Hyacinth Evans. She's traveled especially from Jamaica to join us for this evening, and we really appreciate that, Hyacinth. Our theme of this year's lecture of creating more accessible and inclusive educational institutions is at the core of what we strive to accomplish in the Faculty of Education. When Dr. Stan Shapson arrived as Dean of our faculty in 1990, under his leadership we began building bridges to the communities surrounding York and opening up access to our teacher education programs to underrepresented communities. The Westview Partnership is certainly a legacy of this, as is the Urban Diversity BED program, which was initiated 20 years ago now by our late and esteemed colleague, Dr. Patrick Solomon, who we're honoring this evening, as well as Professor Emeritus Gary Bunch. And Gary, I'd like you to put your hand up because Gary hasn't been active in the faculty for many years. Of course, he's retired. And Gary, we do want to recognize you as well as one of the co-founders of the Urban Diversity Program. And it's lovely that you're able to join us this evening. Other programs that we're working on are like the Advanced Credit Program, Journey to Achievement, Readers to Leaders. There are some more examples. And of course, more recently, we established the York Center for Education and Community and the Jean Augustine Chair in the New Urban Environment. These are further examples, I think, of the faculty's commitment to equity, diversity, and social justice. And as we move forward in the Faculty of Education, we're going to be unifying all of our community-based projects and activities under the umbrella of YCEC within the Research and Professional Development portfolio of Dr. Celia Haig-Brown. This will allow us to provide better service, more of a one-stop kind of point of contact for community people, leaders who want to work with us. And I think it's going to definitely improve our overall coordination of programs and events as well. Our new 2-year BEd, which starts next year, will require all students to have a community placement. Currently, only our concurrent students are in the community placement, but the new program will require all students to take part in a community placement, and we're really excited about that possibility as well. So all students will have that exposure to the community. As well, our new program will require all BED students to take a course on communities and schools, which again, we're very excited that that's going to happen. For those of you who have a bachelor's degree and are maybe thinking of graduate studies, I'd like to tell you just briefly about a new program under development in the faculty. It's a professional master's degree in leadership and community engagement. And it's working through the approval process right now, but it's aimed not only at teachers, but at community leaders in the human and social service sectors. We're quite excited about that, and it's going to be delivered on with an innovative model. It's going to have like an intensive summer session to begin the program, followed by a fall and winter online sessions, and then accumulating in another summer session. So it'll be like a 1-year professional master's program, and it'll be aimed at working professionals to suit your schedule. So we're very pleased with this program, look forward to that coming on stream within, we hope, a year or so. So in conclusion, much is happening in the faculty that we can be proud of, but admittedly, we've got lots of work to do, and there's no question about that. But I'm confident that we're going to be able to rise to the occasion, the commitment's in the faculty to do so, and I'm certainly committed, as long as I'm dean, that this does happen. So we look forward to this evening. It's got a great, I think we've got a great, exciting panel. We're going to start, of course, with Dr. Evans' lecture. We're looking forward to that, and then we'll have a panel discussion and in general, just a discussion of the issues at hand. So I wish everyone a very enjoyable evening. I hope it's a stimulating discussion. I'm sure it will be a stimulating discussion. So welcome again, Hyacinth. You'll be introduced more fully, but welcome. And again, we're honored to have you here this evening. So thank you very much, everyone.
So I didn't make Beverly Jean get up to introduce me. My name is Celia Haig-Brown, and I'm the Associate Dean of Research and Professional Development in the Faculty of Ed. And I am delighted to welcome you here to the annual lecture for the York Centre for Education and Community. As you may be aware, the York Centre for Education and Community, and from what Dean Ouston was saying, is undergoing some very interesting renovations, rejuvenation, revitalization, and we are planning that it shall be a central hub of the Faculty of Education. And I think that I would be much remiss not to acknowledge both what we have happening this evening and ongoing commitment to and support for the York Centre for Education and Community on the part of Dr. Carl James, with whom I'm sure most of you are familiar. So Carl, thank you for keeping us on this. I think it's a really important initiative, and I think it's showing great potential for how we can think ourselves into the future as a Faculty of Education. So I welcome you all. I want to particularly thank the people who have offered to be part of the sessions tonight. And I also want to say how delighted I am that Dr. Evans could join us. Sometimes it's really great to be an associate dean, you know, sometimes it's not so great, but there are these moments. And so Carl and Andrea Davis just kind of said, it's time to go. And off we went to Jamaica to do some work with Kingston College. And that was where we managed to convince Hyacinth that she should come here and do this lecture. So it's there have been some very exciting events for me this year, and certainly this lecture tonight is another exciting event. Welcome to all of you, and I know that you'll be here for a very engaging, provocative evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Celia. So I'm going to read a bit of a bio for Professor Evans. So prior to retiring, Dr. Evans was a senior lecturer in the Faculty of Arts and Education at the University of the West Indies, Mona, Jamaica. She received a PhD in education from the University of California, Los Angeles, in the area of curriculum and teacher education. Over the course of her career, Evans has conducted research on curriculum practices in schools, the field experiences in teacher education, professional learning and development of teachers and teacher educators, and in teaching and learning in schools. Dr. Evans is the author of the following books: Gender Differences in Education in Jamaica, Gender and Achievement in Secondary Education in Jamaica, Social Policy Analysis and Research Project, Inside Jamaican Schools, and Inside Hillview High School, an ethnography of an urban Jamaican school. Ladies and gentlemen, please help me to welcome Dr. Hyacinth Evans.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much, Beverly Jean, for that introduction. I'd like to begin by thanking Dean Ouston for inviting me to give this lecture, and I'm really very happy to be here. I'd also like to thank others who were instrumental in getting me here, Dean Celia, Dr. Carl, Dr. Andrea Davis. They were all instrumental, in persuading me that this was a good idea. And I thought as from the time that the idea came up, I thought it was a good idea myself. So it's good to be here. I'm very glad to be back at York University. I was here in 2006. When I taught in the Summer Institute. From looking at your faces, many of you were not here at that time, but I have fond memories of being here. Just to give you a little background to myself, I lived in Ottawa for many years, where I studied and worked, and after that I spent the most of my career at the University of the West Indies, where I taught not just in the academy, in teaching courses on campus, but I also worked in the schools and in the teachers' colleges, where I tried to learn more about teachers and teaching and learning to teach. And I also tried to really understand why education exercises such a hold on the public imagination, at least in Jamaica, and I think in most countries, because education is so important. And we talk so much about education, about its problems and so on. Now, during those years of doing research in Jamaica, I was seeking answers to some of the questions and trying to address some of the issues that engaged our friend and colleague, Professor Patrick Solomon, in his work here at York. Influenced by what he saw happening with ethnic minority students in some Toronto schools. In his research and in his book, Black Resistance in High School, Patrick reveals aspects of the lives of some ethnic minority students, recent immigrants, and foreigners to the city and to the schools. He showed how the taking for granted routines of school become structures that these newcomers did not understand. He describes the dangerous clash between the students' subculture and the authority structure of the school, which led in many cases to poor teacher-pupil relationships and to students' placement in low streams, or to suspension, or even to expulsion at times. Patrick, as a Caribbean immigrant himself, and as an educator in the Toronto school system, understood both sides of the story. He understood the students' experiences, and he understood the authority structure. In particular, he could see the devastating effects that such actions on the part of the school had on individual students and their future. It was in response to the experiences of some ethnic minority students and their teachers that he created the Urban Diversity Teacher Education Program in 1994, an innovative program, the 20th anniversary of which we are celebrating this year, or you are celebrating at York. Social justice and equity were his major concerns. He felt that preparing teachers to have a social awareness of the lives of their foreign students, their background, their culture, and expectations would better prepare them, the teachers, for teaching these students, and would help them as teachers to address some of the issues and the problems that their students faced. This is why he created that program. He envisaged that teachers who graduated from the Urban Diversity Program would be able to establish better relations with their students, understand and respond more appropriately to students' behavior as a result of being socially aware, and that this would engender social justice, equity, and fairness. These meant a great deal to him, for Patrick recognized the importance of the school and the experience of schools in the lives of young people. Today, let us take time out to laud the work of Patrick, who saw a need and used the academy to address a problem. Now, in this talk, I examine what I plan to do. I will examine the experiences of students in one type of school in Jamaica and compare them with experiences of students at Lumberville, the school that Patrick studied 30 years ago. In preparing for this talk, I went back to the book Black Resistance in High School, and as I read it, I thought, this sounds so familiar. I know about these schools. We have them here in Jamaica. What is similar about these two types of school is their educational status in society. Their low social status is characterized by the poor teacher-student relationship between some teachers and students, and the coexistence of high educational aspirations and low school performance. I see that. High educational aspirations on the part of the student and the parents, but low school performance. And why is that so? Patrick explored that, and this is something I'm also trying to understand. Now, though there are some differences in the two communities, the experiences of students in the schools are comparable. Most importantly, many students at the schools do not gain the benefits of schooling, in the schooling that educators plan for students, including academic achievement and access to the opportunity structure, which is what Lumberville, stated was its goal, preparing students for the workplace. And to a certain extent, to Harborville, the school that I'm going to describe, also says that it does that. This concerns me deeply, the fact that many students do not get these benefits. It concerns me, and I ask the question, how can we make schools good and inclusive, because I think we have to keep our eyes on both. We have to consider criteria of goodness, and we have to consider criteria of inclusiveness. I then, at the end, outlined some policies that schools can adopt to achieve these results. But before I go on, I'd like to just say that in Canada, schools that have poor academic results are in the minority. Canadian schools do very well on all international tests, such as PISA and PIRLS, and score in the top 4 in the PISA results. So I begin by acknowledging the excellence of many Canadian schools and many Canadian teachers. However, there are some Canadian schools, like the one Patrick researched, which have poor academic results for many of their students. And often such schools have difficulty coping with their minority students, which again is a cause for concern. It certainly concerned Patrick. Before talking about the Jamaican school, I will make some observations about Lumberville, the Canadian school that Patrick studied. Okay, so I have done that. Okay, so I'm going to talk about Lumberville now. Lumberville is a pseudonym. It's a low-track school in Toronto, which he studied. Now, immigrants to Toronto from Jamaica have always come from different social classes and social groups. Over recent years, the percentage of migrants who could be classified as professional and senior officials has been as high as 18.2% in 2002. So up to that time, we were having a lot of, well, around 20% professionals coming to Canada. But that percentage declined to about 5.4% in 2011. The vast majority of Jamaican migrants to Canada have usually come not from the professional class, but from the group of immigrants classified by Immigration Canada as service workers, shop, market, craft, and related trades workers, non-workers, not sure who those are, and homemakers. These persons are therefore mainly working class. Most of the migrants to Jamaica, to Canada from Jamaica are working class. On arrival, they occupy a lowly position in Canadian society. These Caribbean parents, many of whom are single mothers too, well, about half are single mothers, about half are in a family relationship. These Caribbean parents have an abiding faith in education, seeing it as an avenue for their children to climb the ladder of success in their new country. However, this dream of success through education does not happen automatically. The schools in Ontario, like those in Jamaica, as we shall soon see, are stratified. This is what I gather from reading that book. There are entry requirements for all students, and so when these newcomers arrive, they are placed in low-track schools because of they have to take an entrance test, and they don't do well. Many of them have come from low-track schools similar to one I'm going to describe in Jamaica. And so when they come here, they find themselves in a similar situation. At the time of Patrick's study, there was a vocational and an occupational track, with Blacks and Native Canadians having the highest representation in these schools. Lumberville is a pseudonym given to the school internally described as a low-track school. The parents of some of these students had migrated from Jamaica. So from the book, we know that the school had a large immigrant population, of which roughly 1/4 is West Indian. The student population was multicultural and multiracial, and the students with their studies were described as Black, working class, West Indian immigrant boys. The students that formed part of the research that Patrick did lacked the educational background, as I just said. And so they realized that going to Lumberville was not going to help them too much. Their white Canadian teachers did not look like them, nor did they understand them. And in this alien institution, they bonded with other students who looked like them and engaged in similar cultural forms. This bonding among students around behavior that was not always acceptable to teachers created antipathy. And this was the problem that really got them, some of them, expelled. Patrick's research describes students' responses to the authority structure of the school's expectations, and the teachers' increasing frustration. The students who felt marginalized within the school developed an antagonistic relationship, and this resulted in their problems. They frequently were absent from school or from classes. They were suspended and so on. So despite their high expectations for schooling in Canada, they did not gain the benefits of going to school. They not only failed at school, but most likely failed in the job, the workplace, and the wider society because of poor school performance. Now, I understand that 30 years later, this alienation of immigrant or black students continues. From the Toronto website, the dropout and suspension rates for black students in Toronto school districts are higher than those of other students, 22.8% compared with 14.1% for all students. Black students are more frequently suspended from school, with 43.7% of black students having at least one suspension compared to 20.5% for all others. And as far as academic achievement goes, blacks are not doing so well either. They have lower graduation rates based on the grade 9 cohort study of 2006 to 11. So that is the situation with the school and with blacks in general and immigrant minority students in the Toronto system. These are just generalizations, and I'm sure they are different. There are specific examples where students are doing well. So I'm just repeating here some of what I had said. I now turn to a school in Jamaica which is representative of one type of school. And as I told you, as I was reading through Patrick's book, I kept thinking about some of the schools that I know so well in Jamaica, and especially in Kingston. So I will describe one type of school of which Harborside is representative. Now, I have carried out extensive ethnographic research in this type of school, and I understand and I'm concerned about the many challenges that these students face. Harborside High School was established in 1970, this is a pseudonym, by the way, as a comprehensive high school serving the nearby community of Harborside. It was called comprehensive because all students were required to learn a skill such as woodwork or technical drawing, as well as academic subjects, so comprehensive academic and vocational technical. In the 1990s, however, the government decided to rename all secondary level schools high schools, although that name change did not remove the differences that existed among these schools. So the school was renamed Harborside High School. Now, just a little background to that stratification and the existence of these very poor schools. Like most societies that have a history of colonialism and slavery, Jamaica has a stratified education system. In years past, there was a high school. No, I think I better go back. Sorry. Oh, let's leave it because I'm not sure. So in years past, there was a high school for the upper and middle classes offering a grammar school education and the other types of secondary school designed for all others. In the years past, beginning in the colonial era, you had the high school for the middle and upper classes, and then another type of school for all others. For many years, the different types of school were administered separately, had different curricula and examinations, and received different per-student subventions. Although almost all secondary schools in Jamaica are now called high schools, the public makes a differentiation between the traditional high school, many of which were established many years ago during the colonial era, and the upgraded high school. So even though the ministry calls all schools high schools, everybody knows that there's a difference among these schools. everybody. And so the term traditional high school cropped up around that time. There are high schools, but we know what the traditional high schools are. So the traditional high schools were established years ago, and they have a tradition of excellence. And the upgraded high school, which as its name suggests, was upgraded from something else. That something else could be the all-age school, established immediately after emancipation for the children of former slaves, with a curriculum and examination appropriate for that population. Or it could be the new secondary school, established later for the same population, or the comprehensive high school, as I had described. Now, in this stratified education system, all students are assigned to high schools on the basis of scores on an exam test, grade 6 achievement test. And because primary schools differ in quality for the same reasons as high schools do, and so the GSAT perpetuates this inequality and this stratification. So Harborside is an upgraded high school. It's one of those that really are at the bottom. It is close to the inner city community of Harborside, where the inhabitants are extremely poor, eking out a living from day to day. They are not even working class. They are below, they don't work. They are mainly unemployed or are higglers selling small bits of merchandise on the sidewalk. Compared with the community of Lumberville in Toronto, this community is really very poor. And in addition to all of this, peddling drugs has become commonplace, again because of poverty. In my research at the school, I was told by teachers that many students at Harborside are in need of love and affection and encouragement and praise, because many of their parents are young and they don't know how to nurture and love adolescents. These students are teenagers. And also, many of these parents migrate for work because they can't find work in Jamaica. So this is the background. I'm just giving you a little background before I look at the commonalities between Lumberville and Harborside. There are 3 curriculum tracks at the school, and they come academic, vocational, and preparing students for work-related program, the vocational. The school states that it prepares students for the world of work, and there's a work experience component for those on the technical vocational track. Or however, the teacher, they are not able to, even though it has been stated that there's a work experience program, this has not been followed up. And graduates of the technical vocational program often have difficulty finding a job because employers, what we call the private sector employers, have a bias against a community like Harborside, that, you know, is riddled with poverty, and then there's crime and drugs and so on. So they don't even want to hire anyone from that community. Although in Jamaica there's more discrimination against individuals on the basis of class rather than color or race, in the case of Harborside, this class bias is coupled with bias against persons who are steeped in poverty, and we're seeing a lot of that, not just in Jamaica. And there's a fear of increasing violence. Okay, so I'm just giving you some background to that. There have been, like at Lumberville, conflicts in the classroom with some teachers and students who flaunt school rules and fail to complete homework assignment, just like at Lumberville. These students, I guess they lack the discipline, you know, to follow through. There are frequent fights at the school. Recently, for example, a physical search of male students by the principal turned up several knives and so on. During the 2013-14 academic year, with a student body of 1225, 8.9% were suspended and 7 were expelled. Few Harborside students drop out of school. Now, Harborside, like many high schools in Jamaica, upgraded or traditional, focus on a regional exam called the YCEC exam. And teachers This is the primary goal of those schools. Teachers determine whether students can register for the CXC exam and how many subjects they can take. Let me see, I've gone ahead of myself, yeah. Okay, so we're talking about the conflicts. Okay, the academic performance now of Harborside. Although the CXC results for most high schools are not excellent, in Jamaica, I don't think they're excellent, hovering between 60 and 70, and for the top schools, 80% maybe. Also, I don't think the traditional high school results are that great, but for the upgraded high school, they are below. And I have here a table which compares the performance. So this is the academic performance for the traditional, which is about 85%, and for the upgraded, it's about 59%. That is of those who were successful in at least 4 subjects in the CXC. So there's a difference in the academic results. Well, when we look at Harborside, it's even worse. They're really at the bottom of the pit. So that, okay. So in the traditional high schools, teachers, students can choose the number of subjects that they take. And you need 4 subjects to get a job, 4 CXC subjects to get a job, 5 CXC subjects to go on to tertiary. So most traditional high schools have students sitting 6 subjects as a safety. And this is based, the previous result of 85%, or is it 89%? 85% is based on 6 subjects passing, okay? At Harborside, 25% sat no, in other words, at Harborside, remember, teachers have to recommend the student. The teachers think that they're so poor that they're not going to give them the chance to let the school look so bad in the public eye. So they recommend how many subjects a student can take or whether they can take any at all. But in last year, in the CSEC exam of this year, 25% took no subject. They sat no subject. They entered for no subject. Now, these are grade 11 students. 20% sat only 1 subject, and only 10% sat 10% 6 or more subjects, which is the norm. So it gives you an idea of how Harborside is doing. I gave you this background just because I want us to look at these communities, then these schools, and see what are the commonalities. Because there are problems in schools in every society. And some of the problems that are salient in schools like Harborside can be found here too. What do these schools have in common? First, they are not valued by society. They serve students from low socioeconomic communities. The students do not all accept the rules and authority structure of the school. Antagonism exists inside the classroom between some teachers and some students, and the students get poor academic results. In addition, there is one-way school community communication at both schools. I didn't go into that in much detail, but talking to teachers and parents, you can see that the schools perceive parents as persons to be informed of things, and not as a community that has resources that can be included in the work of the school. And we got that impression at least I got that impression in looking at Lumberside as well. And there is very little connection between the opportunity structure and the society, even though these two schools say that this is why they exist, to prepare students for this world of work. And Patrick, in his study, made some recommendations about how we can build up that connection between schools and the workplace. Now, some of the features at Harborside that may not be present at Lumberville include the poor quality of primary education. These were not discussed in Patrick's study, and I'm just mentioning them in passing because we have solving these problems really require society-level solutions. But these are some of the problems that existed at Harborside. The poverty of the community, poor school quality of primary education, limited resources of the community, and so on. And as inequality the gap between the rich and poor, widens, we'll see much more of that. And all of those aspects are part of what Darling Hammond calls the anatomy of inequality. The anatomy of inequality, which includes poverty, lack of social support, limited early learning opportunities, unequal access to qualified teachers, and so on. These all create, at the primary level, the start of schools moving away and becoming dysfunctional in some ways. So, but I'm just mentioning that in passing because this is an audience of educators, but I'm not going to think about how we could solve them because it's a wider issue than we can even think about. I will focus instead on the common features of Harborside and Lumberville. What Patrick believed was that the teacher and the teacher-student relationship are critical to creating a democratic environment. And he tried to address this in his urban diversity programs. He made suggestions for, quote, reducing the negative spiraling effects of school structure and student culture on students in order to have a more equitable democratic environment. So, he also believed that all students, including immigrants, should have equitable access to quality teaching and learning. And teachers should be equipped with awareness, sensitivity, knowledge, skills, and cultural competence to nurture such a democratic and create such a democratic environment. He envisaged teachers who were equipped with this awareness, and this was the vision that he had for schools. Patrick had a vision for schools. He had a vision for schools that operated in a way that allowed all students to excel, which meant that teachers had to be on board for those students, had to be there for those students, had to be qualified to understand and work with those students. He recommended that teachers and other school personnel allow marginalized students to be involved in making the rules that would affect them, but students would also be able to would also be held to standards and to reevaluate their work on the basis with the help of mentors and guidance counselors. He also addressed the issue of tracking and the issue of the school-to-work transition. So the focus of the urban diversity program was the preparation of such a teacher, the teacher skilled and understanding of such students. And over the years, no doubt, graduates of this program have been able to bring about change to improve the learning environment for countless urban schools. However, I will argue that for there to be lasting change that does not rely only on individual teachers, there has to be an explicit institutional commitment on the part of the school to social justice and equity and to creating the conditions for the success of immigrant students. I read through Patrick's book, and I did see that institutional commitment. Although the teachers themselves were later on, after there were teachers who had graduated from the Urban Diversity Program, Patrick told me that they had made a difference in these schools. At the time of the research, though, we did not have such teachers in the school. So, and the school itself did not have that institutional commitment. Now, I'm saying that we need an institutional commitment, and fortunately, the province of Ontario has made that commitment. I went on their website, and they have taken a political position, the Ministry of Education. The ministry has added a fourth goal of ensuring equity to the original 3 goals, which are achieving excellence, promoting well-being, and building confidence, and now ensuring equity. This is a commitment on the part of the province, the government, the Ministry of Education, and therefore schools have to come on board with that as well. I saw this on the website. So schools in Ontario have an obligation to ensure equity for all students and to put provisions in place for all students to succeed. Now, the Ministry of Education defines its responsibility regarding equity in this way. All children and students will be inspired to reach their full potential with access to rich learning experiences that begin at birth and continue into adulthood. Well, that's a big commitment. We can talk about the extent to which this is being done, but that is a great commitment on the part of a ministry. And I wish our Jamaican government, well, I'm going to come to that in a minute. At the school level, therefore, equity means that there's fairness in the distribution of resources that influence the gaining of opportunities in society. So in schools that have the goal of equity, as all Ontario schools now have, with that declaration made by the ministry, teachers have to be specially prepared to help ethnic minority students and immigrant students succeed in an equitable manner. Okay, so this is just repeating some of what I just said. The ministry has taken that position. They have added the goal of ensuring equity. It's advertised on the website. All right? So what does that mean? Equity means fairness. Teachers have to be specially prepared. But we have the Urban Diversity Program prepare teachers, and now we have the institutional commitment. So all is well. At least everything is in place for everything to be well. Now, to what extent has the Toronto School District embraced the goal of equity and inclusiveness as part of its mandate? Again, I looked at the website. The Toronto School District Board years of action include the following goals. Can skip that. School climate, it has a part of its goals for the years of action. Wasn't quite sure what that meant, but you can talk about that. Capture and integrate a broad range of student voices. Partnerships with post-secondary institutions to support access to post-secondary education. School climate. That comes under school climate. Social support. Provide resources to support high schools in urban centers across Ontario facing challenges such as poverty, criminal and gang activity. And school community relationships, community support workers, work with schools, and so on. Now, these 3 address the question of inclusiveness. Inclusiveness. School climate, you're having a good climate so everybody feels at home. social support for those who need it, and good school-community relationships. And so we applaud the Toronto School District for their at least their statements with regard to inclusiveness. These are the mandate for inclusive. But schools have to be more than inclusive. Students have to achieve their educational goals, that is, achieve academically. So the schools have to be good as well as inclusive. And there are standards, criteria for goodness. When we talk about good schools, we refer to educational goals of academic achievement on the part of all students, as well as the wider cultural and citizenship goals associated with schooling. We have a challenging curriculum, teacher quality, teaching quality. These are the things that occur to me. I'm sure maybe you have other criteria for goodness in schools, but when I think of goodness, these are what come to mind. Good teachers, professional development that's ongoing, that keep them good to excellent. These are all important. And a well-organized school with good leaders can achieve both ends, good and inclusive. Goodness and inclusiveness. We can have schools that are inclusive and good as well. Now, the Toronto School District, as I will not to, so they have set out some guidelines. Okay, I haven't reached there yet. So they have, okay, so in that regard, Toronto School District has also instituted some practices that address the goal of goodness in addition to inclusiveness. These include having an inclusive curriculum and assessment practices, and assessment is an important part of goodness, and quality teaching and professional learning. So this is what I learned from the website. They recommend use of culturally relevant and responsive pedagogy and associated resources, and support for culturally relevant practice. And this is especially important for immigrant and ethnic minority students. So these are some of the equity goals that Toronto School District has embarked upon. Now, I wonder why I haven't talked about Harborside. Let me just talk about Harborside here, because, and then we'll come back to Lumberville to look at what is happening. In the case of Harborside, the question is, does Jamaica's Ministry of Education and indeed the society recognize the harm of socioeconomic discrimination? Has the ministry made the commitment, the political commitment, and the felt commitment to addressing the problems of upgraded schools? Addressing this problem is an even more daunting task than what faces wealthy societies dealing with marginalized communities. Because at least in wealthy societies, you have the resources. At least you can provide the resources for those who squeal. But in Jamaica, at Harborside, that commitment has not been made. The Ministry of Education in Jamaica has not made that commitment. They have not acknowledged that there is an equity problem in the education system, and so has not made it the mission of the ministry to eradicate this problem and to allocate resources for its solution. Just comparing Lumberville and Harborside, at least the Toronto School District and the Ontario government has publicly stated that these are their goals. We haven't reached there yet. So Ontario is way ahead of us when it comes to these schools that need help. And so in Jamaica, until that is done, until the government and the ministry has recognized and publicly stated that there is a problem and we must provide resources to address it, we can only rely on individual principals and teachers at a school to work with those students and that community. And some schools have done that. A few schools have, they have really worked hard and seen the scores rise, and students have been succeeding and going on to tertiary education in some of these upgraded schools, not all. But I think we need that institutional commitment. Okay. Okay, I think we have talked about that. Okay, sorry, let me go back here. I won't be long here now. So what I did when I was looking at these two schools, I wanted to find out, get some stories about good and inclusive schools. I wanted to find some research on that. And I found some. And for many people, excellent, you have a minority, ethnic minorities, a school where most of the student body are immigrants or ethnic minorities. That's not really a good school. Goodness and ethnic minority doesn't seem to go together. And if you look through the literature, you'd get that impression. But there are good and inclusive schools. There are reports on these schools, and I found some which I will just tell you about. Okay, I'm going to full on, so I haven't. Okay. So in my search for stories about good and inclusive schools, I found two pieces of research which address these two important goals for ethnic minority students. These schools are high-performing schools which serve low-income, mainly Hispanic, and some African-American students in California. One study undertaken by researchers at California and Texas. One study undertaken by researchers at the University of Texas included 8 high-performing Hispanic schools, 3 elementary, 3 middle, and 3 high. And the other study included 5 high schools in Southern California and was conducted by researchers at Stanford. According to the researchers in the Stanford study, they wanted to study schools that were racially just and which prepared their students for success in higher education. They wanted to find schools that were excellent and were attended by minority students and that were racially just, and they found them. These schools also outperformed other comparable schools in state academics standards. Now, what is special about these 13 schools? In all 13 schools, there was an explicit commitment to the success of ethnic minority students. We need that explicit commitment, not just a political commitment, but a felt commitment at the institutional level, at the government level, and at the school level. Most importantly, an ethic of caring and learning prevailed in all schools. And while all schools demonstrated an ethic of caring and communicated high expectations for students, and that's important as well, we found in research on effective schools that having high expectations for students is a critical part of effective schools. There were some differences in the focus at each school. So these were the common focus. Those areas were emphasized, but there were also differences. And these are I'm not sure how I'm doing here. I'm not supposed to. So let me read that to you. So we have an ethic of caring, social support for students. I think I've said these already. Special teacher recruitment and development, professional learning and the collaboration for teachers, high expectations. A curriculum that incorporates aspects of the student background, history and culture, instructional practices that support engaging, relevant and rigorous learning, authentic assessment and school community relations. And you will see that there's a combination of goodness and inclusiveness in what I have just mentioned. Okay. Now, why are these principles important and relevant in Toronto and in Jamaica as well? But let me talk about Toronto, Canada. They are relevant for students from marginalized communities, whether in the Caribbean or in Canada. In the case of Canada, racial and ethnic minorities and immigrants form part of the Canadian mosaic. Canada has a non-discriminatory immigration policy that places importance on the reunification of families. So and we have families here already. Once you have families here, and there's an emphasis on reunification of families, there will always be dark-skinned immigrants, and they will always be part of the Canadian society. So the Ministry of Education has publicly acknowledged how important it is for schools to assume as part of their mission the creation of environments, and the schools have to step up to that plate because the immigrants are here and they will continue to come. So in the case of Harborside, I have just talked about that. We need the commitment on the part of the ministry and the government actually to make these changes. To conclude, when we speak of equity in education, we are speaking of fairness, which means that a student's personal and social circumstances such as gender or ethnic origin or socioeconomic immigrant status should not be an obstacle to achieving educational potential. As an immigrant in the society, this is what Patrick firmly believed. He also believed in inclusion and diversity in educational institutions. A diverse student body strengthens the institution, but diversity is not enough. There has to be goodness as well. A fair and inclusive system that makes the advantages of education available to all is one of the most powerful levers to make society more equitable, and schools can make that difference. Now, to conclude, I want to just read something from Michael Fullen. His report is Achieving Excellence, a Renewed Vision for Education in Ontario. You probably know all about this already, but let me just read through what he has to say. It won't take too long. Ontario's diversity is one of the province's greatest assets. Embracing this diversity and moving beyond tolerance and celebration to inclusivity and respect will help us reach our goal of making Ontario's education system the most equitable in the world. Everyone in our publicly funded education system must feel engaged and included. Ontario schools need to be places where everyone can succeed in a culture of high expectations. They need to be places where educators and students value diversity, respect each other, and see themselves reflected in their learning. So they have that curriculum adjustment, seeing themselves as part of what their study is critical, also to not just inclusivity, but to goodness as well. It is particularly important to provide the best possible learning opportunities and supports for students who may be at risk. This often includes some of our Aboriginal students, children and youth in care, children and students with special education needs, recent immigrants, and children from families experiencing poverty. Our work over the past decade has been focused on ensuring that no child or youth will have anything in the way to stop them from reaching their potential. We are seeing the results, which includes a culture shift in schools that recognize diversity as a contributor to success and not a barrier. The fundamental principle driving this work is that every student has the opportunity to succeed regardless of ancestry, culture, ethnicity, gender identity, language, physical and intellectual ability, race, religion, sex, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, or other factors. That's Michael Fullen talking. Thank you.
Dr. Evans, thank you so much for your discussion this evening. Folks, we're going to pay attention to the time, and we're going to permit 3 questions to be asked of Dr. Evans. So we've got mics on both sides of the room. So if you've got any questions for Dr. Evans, if you can come up to the mic quickly and ask those questions before we start with the panel.
Hello, good evening. Hello, I'm Shawnee, second year student, second year PhD student here. I'm planning to look at the use of multiliteracy pedagogy in inner city, grade 3 inner city schools in Oh, I think she's trying to turn it up. Okay, so I'm planning to look at the use of multiliteracy pedagogy in grade 3 inner city schools in Jamaica. And from your description of the school in your study, it seems as if it was in an inner city community. And you also made mention of the fact that the government in Jamaica has not explicitly done anything to improve the curriculum and provide equity. However, I am aware that in recent efforts, the ministry and the minister, Ronnie Thwaites, in particular, have been trying to improve equity by their laptop programs and digital technology, digital literacies. So do you foresee in the near future that there might be more specific changes, particularly in inner city schools or regarding students from the working class?
Yeah, thank you very much for that. Yes, thank you very much for that question. Yes, these are recent initiatives, and I'm not sure to what extent, well, this is related to an overall goal of equity and addressing the problems of a certain type of school, and this is why I did not include that information in my talk. But yes, he has, and I think some of these initiatives are funded by special business groups. Yes, but he has been providing tablets, for example, to some schools, and some other technological developments, digital literacy, and he has special programs, not for all schools, just for a few schools that he has. I think I saw something there. Not all students, not all schools are benefiting from these initiatives. But the point I'm making here is that they were not linked to a wider goal of equity and addressing the problems of that type of school.
Good evening. My name is Jody Glean. I'm the Education Advisor in the Center for Human Rights here at York University. And I did my research a few years back at the grad level around looking at the representation of African Canadians in the history textbooks used in Montreal, Quebec. Now, one of the, from the nature of my work and the research that I do, we have a very unique problem, I would call it, in Ontario. Surrounding looking at strategies and recommendations to increase the schooling experiences and increase graduation levels, and looking at the different types of programming, particularly for the black students in the high schools and I would probably even argue at the elementary levels as well. And so I sort of wanted to attain your perspective on a certain situation where, in the beginning of the program, the MC, Dr. Beverly Jean, had spoken about looking at how we define certain pieces. When we look at the term immigrants, when we look at the term equity and fairness, who are these programs targeted to, right? And so I find that there's a fracture, and how this fracture comes about is that every single time we are trying to push forward a program that is for a particular racial group, and in this case we're talking about the black community members, it is usually met with resistance from an institutional level. And then at the same time, when a program seems to be making headway, we then have a fracture or resistance from the community level. And most recently, we know that there was a lot of controversy around the starting of an Afrocentric schooling program here in Toronto, but I believe maybe last year or so there was, and I'm going back just from watching the news where there was a program that they wanted to implement for members of the Somalian community around having specific programming and a mentoring program for students in the Somalian community. But then there were members of that community that were speaking up against it for very legitimate reasons as well, and concerns around being stigmatized of having their students or having their children go through these type of programs, etc. And so I'm trying to figure out, how do we build the bridge? How do we identify the problems? There's a lot of research around low graduation rates and the schooling experiences of these students, yet when it comes to actually implementing programs to tackle these said problems, it is either a resistance from the institutional level, yet at the same time at the community level. And when we have resistance at the community level, I believe that it fuels the part of the institution to say, well, this is exactly why we don't enroll these programs. And so I'm wondering, what's your perspective on this? And is there a parallel problem in Jamaica around this issue as well?
Can you hear me? No? I have to go there? Yeah. You can hear me? Okay. Yeah, that's a tough question. But there are two parts to it. In Jamaica, we have not had, because, how do you make, we are 91% black. So inclusiveness is not an issue. It's really goodness in schools that we are really grappling with. How do we get all those schools, especially those that had a history and of starting with low resources and how do we improve them? And also, how do we get parents to understand what is needed in their work with their children? Okay, so that the goodness in school is what is the issue there. But you talk about introducing special programs in a society that is maybe, let's say, 80% white. I'm just talking off the top of my head. But it's a white society, and this has to be really accepted, not just by the community members who are going to benefit from it, but also by the larger society. And that is really an issue. I suppose one has to be very political and strategic in the way it is introduced. And I know very often, and I probably others can address this better than I can, because I grapple only not with inclusiveness, and we have not introduced anything like that. But I think that it's just the preparation of people for such programs. And I know that some communities will resist programs that someone else thinks is in the best interest of their children, but it's different from everybody else. Because, immigrants come to this country thinking, they are going to enter into the mainstream and they are going to go to school and pass all their exams and get a job and be successful. It doesn't really work like that. But when they see a special program for their students, they may resist that as well, because then their children are not following a program that is a mainstream program. So they may resist it for all kinds of reasons, but they have to be educated as well. So a lot of the parents have to be educated as well. And that may seem a bit patronizing, but because they have their own views about these as well. And I think it's just the way that programs are introduced. But I know that maybe others here would be better able to answer that question. But it's a good question about how do you introduce programs and have them accepted?
Is there anyone in the audience who wants to quickly tackle that question? How do we design, develop, and implement programs that the broader society as well as the various groups are more willing to accept and participate in? Carl? Yes, sir. And there's a gentleman here at the front. So can you use the mic, please?
No, I don't have any answer, but I want to take apart what we might think some of the premises of the question, right? So if we're taking the Afrocentric school, and it's very interesting how that debate got taken up, right? So there are many people part of, let's say, Toronto's various black communities that were very gung-ho and supportive, and some were not. So when we ask the question, why isn't the black community or the black community, supportive of this initiative? Because it's to help them and what. So I think sometimes we demand that uniformity of thought, that one opinion that comes from this minority group. And if that minority group does not wholeheartedly agree, i.e. Somali communities with respect to, specialized programs, then that becomes fodder for kind of, power structures to not have to engage that larger debate of why historically these communities, some members of that community may benefit from that, some may not. Some will support it, some may not. So it was very interesting how sometimes we demand this kind of uniformity where we take away like a complexity of thought, of opinion. And I think one way of conquering that or going against that is to have reasoned and very substantive arguments for and against that come from the communities that for which these programs are designed to empower, to engage. So I want us to think about how, there are things that we can agree on and disagree on, and how do we make sure that the power structure doesn't engage with that debate, in a way that halts the progress of the initiative. So I think that might be a question. It's not an answer, but I myself have been thinking about that as well. So.
Thank you, Sam. So you had a comment as well? Okay, we're going to draw them here
We
next.
figured we needed to step in early. I would agree with everything you said. I would simply add, though, another issue, and I think there's a hypersensitivity given the political nature of organizations like the TDSB. I'm a teacher at the TDSB. And one of the concerns that is a very real subtext is concerns of racism or offending one particular group within a group. And you're right. Something like Afrocentric schools, which I was involved in the discussion about it, there was not a uniformity of opinion. And there are a lot of people that scares them because they don't want to come down on the wrong side. And because there are implications and accusations on being whatever the wrong side is. And so it's much safer not to engage in substantive analysis, persuasion, drawing people in with very different and very strongly held opinions and working through to a solution. Again, I'm not going to give an answer here, but one of the things I would say is, as a board and as an institution, they have to draw in community members who are willing to engage in a serious discussion and hopefully have that lead to a consensus that the board can take, and then, okay, I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm hearing what you're saying, I'm hearing what you're saying. This is our idea for putting it together. What do you think? And I think people are scared of the process and the implications of beginning the process.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I'd like to try to address this as well. And I'll talk about a personal experience. Some good points being made on allowing for diversity. That's true. We need to do that. But we also have to see that we also have to look at what's common with everyone, because everybody always has something in common, regardless of where they might stand on an issue. And I'll relate to you a story, true story. When I was first elected chief of my community, I had to try to resolve a very tough issue in my community, and it's an historical thing that has festered in my community since we became part of the reserves in Canada. And for my people, that was back in the 1830s. And along the way, there were factions that were created in my community. They were religious factions. So my people were taught to become Catholic, and they were taught to become part of the United Church. And then there was another faction that held on to the traditional beliefs. And those three things came together one time in a conflict. What happened was, one of our younger members of our community, who was relearning their traditional ways and had walked away from the church, passed away suddenly. His last wish was to be buried in a traditional cemetery that had been closed by the church leaders in my community back in the early 1900s. It had been closed off, and no one was to be buried there again, ever. It created such a conflict in my community that neighbors were fighting against each other. People were calling each other out and threatening each other over this issue, that they didn't want this person being buried in the traditional ceremony, in the traditional burial ground. So what I had to do was try to come up with something here. So I called everybody together, a community meeting. I talked to each leader of each faction. And before we started the proceedings, I asked each one of them to do what I did today, which was to say a prayer. And each one of them did in their own way. Then I asked each one of them to look at what it is that they talked about. What did the other person talk about in their prayer? And each one of them said the same thing, that they were all talking about the same thing, that they all wanted peace, they all wanted some resolve to the issue, and that they all wanted the community to remain as one. And we had an understanding right off the start. We still had some issues, but over the years, we've managed to overcome those issues. We now have people being buried in our traditional ways. We now have the church, each church, accepting those traditional values and traditional ceremonies as part of their own. And that goes a long way. Sometimes that diversity, even if it's a forced diversity or something that's artificial created by something else, it's still an understanding. And sometimes we have to understand that we all started from somewhere. And that those things still lie underneath everything that we are. That's all I have.
Thank you. So what I'd like to do now, folks, is to introduce the panel discussants for this evening's session. We have Mr. Montague, so just as you've sat, I'm going to ask you to stand again, and if you could join us at the podium. We've got Stephen Marks from Lord Dufferin Public School, and we've got Sam Teckle, who is currently a PhD student, and if I could say, one of my former students, a graduate of the UD program. So folks, the desk is over this way, and we have moderating the panel Dr. Susan Dion, who's up at the back of the room. Dr. Dion is a First Nations researcher and teacher educator at York University in Toronto. Her teaching and research focus on understanding the representation of Aboriginal people and the relationship between First Nations and non-First Nations people in Ontario's publicly funded schools. She's the author of 2 leading reports on Aboriginal education in Ontario's public schools, Decolonizing Our Schools and Our Place in the Circle, looking at Métis and Aboriginal content in Ontario faculties of education for the Métis Nation of Ontario. She is also involved in events for the broader community, like this summer's Invisibility, Indigenous in the City exhibition, and the People for Education conference. She's also the author of Braiding Histories. Folks, if you could welcome Dr. Susan Dion and our panel of guests.
Thank you for that introduction. I'm not sure this is working. Okay. Well, the panel's been introduced, so I'm not quite sure what else you would like from me at this point, but I think that our panelists are ready to respond to the question that they were given, which is how might educational institutions strive to be accessible to and inclusive of diverse populations given the structural, societal, and systemic obstacles that continue to challenge and obfuscate the efforts of equity workers and teachers. So I'm looking forward to hearing from each of you, and I think you've been each asked to speak for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. So I know that's not very much time to handle such a big question, but we're looking forward to your comments. Thank you.
Okay. Okay. So I don't know if this. Yeah, I hope you guys can hear me. Okay, cool. So I'm going to be completely honest. First, when I got the question, I completely and utterly did not understand it. So I'm going to start with that. But thinking of the question and how it was structured and written, and if you ever worked with him, I figured that Carl probably wrote it. So so not to say that I didn't completely get the spirit of the question, but for me, I had to, break it down into two parts, and that kind of, I guess, framed some of my thoughts. So it's a difficult question and a worthwhile one, but it's also two-parted. So for me, given the structural barriers that persist, what are some ways educational institutions, universities, school boards, ministries of education, can strive to be substantively open, accessible to a range of populations, and in this case, marginalized ones? And the second part of the question was how do we, let's say, teachers, professors, community, etc., interested in social justice keep doing equity work as it becomes maybe, let's say, more difficult or yields less and less return? And I'll come back to that, hopefully. And I just want to, I guess, put up front that my perspective is coming from this, from being a graduate student, from being a graduate of urban diversity teacher education program with Beverly. And that's the perspective I think I offer some thoughts. So the question takes the issue of making our institutions more diverse, equitable, and more socially just from two perspectives, what sociologists might call macro and micro approach. So at the level of government, provincial or municipal and institutional, so let's say school board and university, as well as at the college level, there have been, of course, policy and programmatic interventions made to pry open the institutions to marginalized populations. What Patrick Solomon once called the racially minoritized. I like that. These efforts have resulted in policy. We have Multiculturalism Act, Employment Equity Act, several provincial initiatives. And on the institutional levels, I think at the university, we have, and that's the context I'm most familiar, we have things like the transitional year programs, inner city teacher education program, the UD program here at York, equity studies, and then more, and then I would put these under this same, I guess, category of attracting non-traditional populations, Caribbean studies, African studies, in the US broadly called, under this ethnic studies moniker. So across these different contexts, these policies and programs are designed to increase and the access and participation of marginalized groups. And another feature of many of these programs at the university level have in common is that they are currently and have been for a while now under attack across here, Canada, US, the UK. So as austerity is the new socio-political context, it seems these programs are the first to go. And these programs are marketed as symbolic of the university's commitments to social justice, equity, and diversity. So I think many of us in this room would logically ask, if these programs cease to exist, what happens to the university's commitments to the promises of equity? And as such, for, I guess, our efforts of late have been put to saving these programs. And as I stated earlier, though macro and micro perspectives are useful in helping us chart entry and access as kind of markers of progress and of social justice, what these perspectives miss in their rigidity, I think, is important and significant middle ground. Again, to refer to the university, as part of the social justice work, we can always advocate for access and participation of marginalized groups into the university. But what are they learning when they enter these classrooms? I asked that, fully cognizant that it's possible in 2014 to still take a full year feminist course and not read any black feminist thinkers or social problem or in social conflict course and never broach the topic of race. This is in a university which may brand itself as equity-minded. This is the context in which diversity, social justice, and equity work is happening today. In a neoliberal capitalist context, nothing escapes marketization. What needs to be part of our conversation here is what John Komaroff might call diversity incorporated, or diversity Inc., the commodification of diversity and equity as constitutive of the university's branding and marketing strategy. It seems part of the work is yanking back progressive and even radical meaning of such terms, which helps us frame our work. One response is to advocate for more critical reading lists in our courses, in fighting what we might call diversity light. Because it's wrapped in universities' claims to, and this is the paradox, right? Multiculturalism, equity, diversity, and social justice, but also colorblindness, cultural neutrality, and openness. Somehow, notwithstanding colorblindness, it's often the one doctoral student of color that gets repeatedly asked to feature in promotional material. You know, departmental videos, faculty websites, and recruiting flyers, go figure. So in a roundabout way, what I've been trying to do, in part, is mark what might be unique and different about the current context and the changing terrain on which this work is done. The notwithstanding significant gains that have been made on the backs of many who worked for social justice in past years, past decades even, what I think we're forced to do is grapple with the fast-changing social, political, cultural climate of this work with respect to any institution in society. This forces us to be creative, to be innovative, while neoliberalism and austerity is the new norm. I like the analogy of how creative athletes are when they're trying to cheat in their attempts to stay ahead of sports science and testing. So should we stay ahead as well, to ward off, in our social justice efforts, to ward off complacency, hesitation, reservation, and even fear. The key to any innovation is not only necessity, but creativity, particularly if we take the long project into perspective. Sustainability and longevity is key. And now, just in the little time I have left, I wanted to deal with the second half of the question about the personal, about the costs of doing this work in what Stuart Hall once remarked, in and against the institution, and the costs of gently, or not so gently, nudging more equity-minded agendas forward. I wanted to just quote a little passage from Angela Davis in 2007 in The Guardian. Speaking on Obama, she wrote, "It's the notion that we have moved beyond racism by not taking race into account. That's what makes him conceivable as a presidential candidate. He's becoming the model of diversity in this period, and what's interesting about his campaign is that it has not sought to invoke engagements with race other than those that have already existed." And I think that's important, those that have already existed. She continues, "The Republican administration is the most diverse in history, but when the inclusion of black people into the machine of oppression is designed to make that machine work more efficiently, then it does not represent progress at all. We have more black people in more visible and powerful positions, but then we have more black people who have been pushed down to the bottom of the ladder. When people call for diversity and link it to justice and equality, that's fine. But there's a model of diversity as a difference that makes no difference, the change that brings about no change," end quote. So these Davis's comments link back to the comments made earlier about Diversity Inc. as brand and a marketing strategy, and yields many questions at the level of the individual. How do we avoid this co-opting of our image and bodies, of those of us in institutions, to promote this diversity light, the change that brings about no change? And if we take the charge to be more creative in our social justice agendas, what that also demands of us is to rethink the ways in which we have always and already been doing this work. What would it mean to think beyond programs designed to increase participation and access in the ways that we've always thought of them, and increasing the diversity of those in positions of power? The critical tools by which we mark and register progress may need to be updated in this context of neoliberalism and austerity. And we could even say, because it's a word now, post-raciality. Again, demanding maybe more imaginative strategies and agendas. Of course, I think I would be remiss not to mention the personal costs of those working from within these institutions. The daily violence and epistemic costs uniquely directed at those meant to embody and contain diversity. Those always asked to be on the equity panels, to serve as diversity officers to the university. Those racialized graduate students forced to construct alternative study groups across their departments as forums not only for support, but of survival. In other writing, I reflected on many instances meeting other racialized graduate students in informal settings across many different universities, in all over the place, right? So talks downtown, in salons, attending sporting events even. So without fail, the conversation seems to turn to the subject matter that the role that race plays, difference, equity, social justice in our respective departments and university. While it's astounding, I think, the immediate intimacy and openness with which we, as strangers, quickly allies, share our experiences regarding marginalization, racism, and so on in our departments. These moments of collective meaning making, of healing and restoring are vital, I think, across many institutions, and perhaps necessary for those of us graduate students specifically of color, as these experiences can be taxing. And a salient feature I think is important of these interactions is that they are, though helpful and necessary, informal and random, and least of all structural. I bring this up and think about this alongside a senior black faculty member who recently told me that he's working on a paper with the title, "I Wouldn't Be Hired Today." So ultimately, whether it is the metrics we use to track progress or the policies or programs, and us constantly revamping them, making them increasingly dynamic, creative, and imaginative, staying ahead of the retrenchment of such agendas, and keeping strategies 2014 fresh at any level in any year is difficult, but worthwhile work. And it is this work, as Stuart Hall reminds us, with no guarantees. No guarantees that our work will yield results in the form that we expect or that we will immediately reap the benefits of this work. It is this feature, I think, of the work that I think of as a hopeful uncertainty that I think keeps us working and so rife of possibility, and I might even say a source of imagination and creativity. Thank you for listening.
Well, first of all, Sam, I congratulate you on that. I really hope that you didn't, you got more time, lead time than I did. I was asked by a fellow colleague to step in 2 days ago, so if you did that in 2 days, I'm in real trouble. I'm going to come at this from, I guess, more of a micro perspective. I come at this from the point of view of being a graduate of the Diversity Initiative with Patrick, and I've been a teacher for 17 years. My life, my experience has been that of a teacher in the classroom every day, putting aside the theory to actual practice, hopefully good practice, over these last years. The question is an interesting one, and it's certainly one of multiple levels and multiple questions. I'd like to start a little differently by saying what, in my perspective, the Toronto District School Board, for whom I work, does well. As I mentioned, I teach at Lord Dufferin Public School. It's an inner city school in Regent Park. I don't know how many of you know the school, but it's a pretty modern. What's one of the newer schools? It goes back. The original school goes back to the turn of the century, but it was rebuilt in 2000. Very modern, a lot of equipment, weight rooms, band rooms. We've gone heavily on Wi-Fi. Board has poured a lot of money in to try to get tablets, iPads, into the classroom. We're rewiring high fiber optics. A lot of money is going into the school to try to make it as good as they can. There's some things I will say, again, being a frontline worker, that I think, to my perspective, the TDSB does very well. The curriculum has been renovated and changed and tweaked several times over the last several years. I'm sure most of you know that. And it's a good, the documents as I see them are good documents insofar as they give teachers, I believe, a lot of wiggle room, a lot of room to maneuver and to teach within broad contexts. And those teachers interested and engaged and ready to do equity work can find themselves working very well within the structures because there's quite a bit of freedom on how to deliver content. So teaching within the board and using the Ontario curriculum, it's quite easy for me, again, giving the time and the high speed of education, to create something that meets, to my mind, the equity frameworks. When you ask how are we doing, and what I mean how are we doing, how do we measure success? How are we achieving? Are we doing well? Where do we need to improve? The board, I think, has been pretty good about accountability. EQAO is one of those provincial tests. I'm not a huge fan. There's those of you who know about the EQAO, there's a lot of politics involved in it, and I'm not going to take time going into that, but there's a lot of games that are played on the provincial level. It does not have a lot to do with the Toronto District School Board. It's made a decisions made above our heads. But there is another test that is, I think, more useful. It's called the CAT-4. And Lord Dufferin is one of several schools in the inner city considered a model school. I don't know how many people are familiar with the term. But model schools are schools that are schools that are within low on the LOI, that's the Learning Opportunities Index, which is a number crunch created by the board to try to assess the needs of the school. They assess needs of the school using an amount of different criteria, things like the educational level of the mother, average income, the wealth of the neighborhood value of the real estate property, and number of people on assistance. And they crunch that number and they create a perspective of needs. And schools within those needs are considered model schools, and they translate into additional funding and resources. Now, this costs money, and as we all know, a lot of things come down to money. And the CAT-4 is a second test that is done at the beginning of the year and at the end of the year, unlike EQAO, which is done at the end of the year. And we can track progress in reading, writing, vocabulary, and other things over the year. And we have, in addition to that, a school climate survey. And that asks students to identify how safe they feel, how comfortable they are in their community, how do teachers treat them, how do they interact with other students, do they feel respected. And it's a private survey. There's no name on it. The kids are given the test. There's a stricture to take it, so we don't even look at the test, and data is tracked. That is probably, when you're looking at data, for example, how are Jamaican students doing compared to Indo-Pakistani students, that is probably, I would guess, the main source of that data. I'm not sure beyond that, but that's pretty much it. There's a lot of effort on accountability. Professor Evans was making in reference to her excellent talk about the changes happening in Toronto. You made references to the years of action. This is a document just came out 2013-17. If you haven't got a copy, I would recommend it. It is online. The germane page that to me is the years of action is generally this outline. And it outlines student achievement and well-being, parent and community engagement, fiscal stability and accountability, staff inspiration and support, and education for sustainable development. It's a fascinating document, and there's an enormous amount of subtext in it. And there's it's a whole paper. It's worthy of several different subjects and final papers on things that are going on here. A couple of things I want to address, carrying on Professor Evans' comments, is how do we address these societal and systemic problems for racialized and minority students? The board has pushed very front and center, very publicly, and a 4-year plan, and we'll see how it works, parent and community engagement. And I'd just like to read you, there are 7 points where they are aiming for. These are the stated goals of the Toronto District School Board, the largest school board in the nation of Canada. Increase public confidence through the implementation of quality service standards throughout the system. Improve communication to the public through a new, refreshed, and user-friendly website. Embrace community outreach through a new and improved focus on social media interviews. Increase awareness to 100% of school councils of parent reaching out and other grants to support these initiatives, so money will be available for that. Help 100% of model schools for inner cities parent academies to make budget decisions to support training needs. Implement recommendations approved by the board for the review of community advisory committees. Provide more relevant and stronger supports to trustees to support their governance work. Again, we could be talking for quite a bit of time on each one of these points. But looking at this and drawing on my experience dealing with a lot of parents, I've sat in a lot of parents' councils, I've talked to, obviously, parents in the space of parent-teacher interviews, which I'm going to enjoy 1 week from tonight, is this. One of the greatest differences I've seen, and I've taught in what North End schools, which are quite well off, and my second school where I spent 9 years at Dovercourt Public School, which is sort of a mid-level school, Spadina and DuPont, and now in an inner city school in Regent Park. Having dealt with parents in all those communities, I can say one of the most powerful determinants of the support the child needs, the resources the school gets, the attention to requirements that they receive is parent advocacy. And it's not, and of course that might seem like a platitude, but the parent advocacy I mean is effective parent advocacy. If there's a problem in some North End schools, like the West Preps or John Ross Robertsons, the parents there are judges, they're lawyers, they're heads of corporations. They have no problem calling the principal, the superintendent, the head of the Toronto District School Board on speed dial and saying, this is a problem in my child's class, what are you going to do about it? And my experience in 17 years is they'll do something about it within 48 hours. That's my experience. And if a teacher can access that parent, which some of them are very good at, and this is Politics 101, they can get things done within 48 hours, or it will happen. The difference, from what I have seen, is the needs are greater in the inner city schools. The parents care just as much in the inner city schools. They are trying to be involved as much as they can in these schools to the extent of going to the parent, going to the principal, and advocating for their child. But they don't have the power behind them, and they don't necessarily have the communication skills to go to the next level and the next level, or to heck with these 4, 5, 6 levels, I'm going to Donnacquan. And that is the ball game, ladies and gentlemen. And the question is, can we engage parents to be better advocates for their children, for the programs their children need? If that happens, and teachers are trying to do that, again, we are in a very delicate dancing act. We're employees of the Toronto District School Board. And what the interest of our child is, who we are supposed to be the advocates for, may be contrary to what the board wants us to say, do, or act. It's a delicate balance. Usually it's not a big thing, but once in a while you are left with that situation where I'd really like to say something, but I don't think it's going to go over very well. So the goal, I think, if this parent community happens, if the money is put into it, if we can create a generation of advocate parents, if we can create a generation of advocate parents who are effective communicators, that is a game changer. Because right now, you can be ignored if you're an inner city school parent. And that is, I think, the biggest problem. And it all filters down from that. And that's my...
Thank you. I want to thank Dr. Evans for her presentation tonight, because it actually, I do a comparison of what she was talking about from my own community and to the experiences of the people in her community. It's the same thing. And so what I'm going to talk about is, I'm going to say that assimilation should be a two-way street. And I'll start off by saying that John A. Macdonald and his policies are still alive today. And that's the problem. Nothing has really changed. And I do that, and I say that coming from where I come from. I live under the Indian Act. I was born under the Indian Act. I still live under the Indian Act. The Indian Act was created in 1876. Canada became a country in 1867. So 9 years later, created an act for a people that we still live under today. Much of what happens in our schools, in our community, are the result of living under the Indian Act. We falter because we live under the Indian Act. We make gains because we live under the Indian Act. But we never quite get to where we're going because we live under the Indian Act. Because Canada is too busy trying to assimilate us into the culture. They're somewhat successful. I'm dressed the way I am today, dressed the way I am, dressed the way I have been since I was a kid. But there are other ways that they can't change us, and that's the way we think. And that's the way that we live, the way we are culturally. Those things still remain alive in our communities. Those things are still alive in our children. And until they're understood, and until they're part of the education system and understood, things will be hit and miss all the way. And that's been the problem. I've been involved in a number of committees, boards, over the years, both as a politician and as a leader, as an educator in my community. And we've always tried to engage the people that were hurt by an education system, the people that were hurt by the residential school system. My parents, me, my kids. We're a people that have been hurt by that system. And so how do we trust it? How do we trust it when somebody else is telling us that this is the way it has to be? We tried to do it a number of ways over the years. One of those is by re-engaging people in a different way, by allowing for the culture. I talked about that here. By allowing for the culture in our classrooms, by allowing for the history of our people in our classrooms in the way that we know it. Not the history that's written in the books, not the history that tells me that I'm a savage, but the history that tells me that I'm an Anishinaabe, a good person, because that's what that means. Anishinaabe is a good person. And that history is in our communities. It's in those elders. And so we engage the elders. We engage the elders to come be part of it, to be a part of what we're doing, changing curriculum and changing ways. And then we're engaging the educational institutions to help us out to do that. We're seeing some of that happening now in our school boards, in our local school boards. Simcoe County School Board has been a part of a number of these initiatives. I've been a part of those as well. We're allowing for culture in our schools by having the language taught, because people had lost their language and their culture because the Indian Act was successful. My mother once told me that I had to learn to speak English and that she wasn't going to speak Anishinaabe to us anymore, because she said, it's not going to ever get you a job. I'm glad she was wrong. But it's also, on the other side, the flip side of the coin is that I shouldn't have that job. I shouldn't have to have that job. If people were doing the right thing in the beginning, they would have allowed for that culture to continue to flourish just as it always had, because it would grow. It would grow in different ways. And the people would become stronger in different ways. And we could assimilate into a society that would assimilate into us. Canada uses assimilation as a blanket. It's a safety blanket. And they put it over top of everything. Recently, they changed the name of it. They called it multiculturalism. You understand what I mean? That's why I say that it has to be a two-way street for every one of us. Every one of us that are a minority group, we have to fight for that. We have to ask for that. We have to be asked to be understood that way. So that I can understand you and you can understand me. We have to go further than just the white people in this country. Every one of us have to understand each other in order for things to grow the way it's supposed to, the way human beings are supposed to be. That's assimilation. But you're allowed to be who you are. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Now we have some time for questions. So if we have some questions for our panel. Just people need time to think, that's all. Oh, we have one over here, and then we have another one.
My name is Linda Lynch, and I come from a Dutch background, so my parents immigrated to Canada, so I know a little bit about being assimilated into the culture. There was only, the Catholic school was a French Catholic school, so we had to go to the French Catholic school because that was the only school available to us. So we learned French, and the community spoke English. And then I went to school and so on. But the purpose of my being here is, again, a minority situation. My son is, he's recently been in the hospital, 2 admissions lately, and he's not getting any education. And I received a note today that said, oh yes, he's not on the list because he's missed more than 15 days of school. So from November, December, January, he's not allowed to have education, is what I'm getting from the TDSBO right now, or TSB. I've had one hoop after another trying to get him to get some education, and I don't think that is quite right at this point. So I'm not sure all the hoops. I'm not from the Toronto area. I'm from the Cornwall area, and I'm very frustrated with knowing what is going on here. I don't know. But anyways.
Sorry, if you'd like to talk to me afterwards, I have quite a few connections with the board, but that's not really a question for the panel, so maybe we can move on.
Yes.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, my name is Louise, and I want to thank the panelists and also can you hear me? Okay. I want to thank the panelists and also the keynote lecturer. Dr. Evans spoke of the achieving excellence, a renewed vision for education in Ontario, and spoke of the 4 goals, especially the one about equity. And I totally see her point that by making a mission for an institution, it helps to transcend individual teachers or individual educators. However, the danger, as we all in this room know, is that by having it in a public document and by stating it, then there's a certain amount of complacency because it seems as if, okay, we've done that, we've covered that, that's okay, we've addressed that, and now we can move on to other things. And the panelists spoke to some of those things, like, for example, the power of parent advocacy, among other of the points that were raised. But I wonder if we could just speak to how do we get beyond the publicly issued documents that make us think that we're moving forward when actually maybe we're not.
I'll try to respond to that. From my point of view, it goes back to what I was saying, and the idea of creating articulate, aware, involved parents is an ongoing struggle. The more free time you have, the more time you have to be involved. The less time you have because you're working 3 jobs, the less time you have to be involved. And one of the things I was truly impressed by since I've come to Lord Dufferin is the real commitment parents have had to their education. They really care. No surprise to me. But when I came to the school, people who were saying, oh, Lord Dufferin, oh, Regent Park, was that, that you're going to have very little parent support. And so when I started calling parents, about behavior problems or about attendance or about work or simply just to introduce myself, I was bracing myself for they're not going to be engaged, they're not going to listen, they're not going to come in. And of course, I was completely wrong. They jumped in like, he's giving you problems? What do I need to do? Oh, he's not doing his work? What do I need to do? How can I help you out? And the idea of parents, though, kicking the ball forward is the idea that they will be able to hold the board's feet to the fire. If again, stated goals, very nice stated goals, we've got it right here, it's on page 3. If the parents can organize, can articulate, can stay with it, and push the board to make the words real, then we have something going on. If, on the other hand, we can't do that, if it's just words on paper and parents don't put teachers' feet to the fire, trustees' feet to the fire, principals' feet to the fire, it will be just words, and it will be it will not really move that. One of my areas of cynicism, being a teacher, is we tend to really have these lovely initiatives that go for a year and then we come up with a new one, and that's a problem.
Thank you. Yes, go ahead, thanks.
Again, from experience, I'll say that a lot of these initiatives, when they're brought in by the governments, are all good ideas, but that's just what they are, and that's as far as they get. Is they get to the point of reaching the objective, but they don't go beyond that. And one of the ways that I'm talking about this is I was involved in, I was on the writing team to come up with the Teacher's Toolkit on Aboriginal Education in Ontario in 2006. We created this wonderful document, and one of the things we said as the writing team, excuse me, one of the things we said was, this isn't going to work unless Ontario puts some money behind it to train the trainer. It's going to collect dust. And here we are all those years later, and that's exactly what's happening. But they wouldn't listen to us in that room. And that's what's happening time and time again.
Sam, do
Yeah, so I think there's always things we need to be hesitant of for anybody making public statements about how to advance social justice or equity, especially when we come to school boards. Because I think the metrics by which some of these things are measured or how they're held accountable is through testing, right? EQAO, CAT4, secondary literacy tests. And what happens when much stake is placed on those testing, they affect classroom instruction. They do. They affect teachers' priorities, they affect administration's leadership plans. So we have to be hesitant of using that measure as a metric of progress, especially with alternative schooling sites, right? And we could think of the Afrocentric School as one example. And second, I think to connect back to an earlier question about how the debate around Afrocentric School was taken up in the various black communities in Toronto, right? So there's a way in which that, scenes of these people, black people yelling at each other and debating the issue was not taken up as debate. It was taken up as dissension, it was taken up as fracturing, right? So we have to think about how those modes of speech get taken up. So when we ask for our parents to become effective advocates, I want to just push our thinking about how parents who are advocating for their children's education are doing it in a way that is not legible to schools and school boards, to educators and principals. So yes, assimilation has to be a two-way street. So I want us to think about how I think that as a primary mode of strategy of making, certain groups of parents advocate in similar ways to other groups of privileged parents might be a problematic. We could push ourselves to think further about how we might be able to better do that. Because there was not long ago a recent report in the Toronto Star about how certain parent communities are able to raise $1.2 million. Exactly. So if we take that logic of thinking, we would tell people from marginalized groups, well, if you guys could just raise that money, you'd be able to take your kids to go to France for a week in February too. So to me, that's the logical extension of that thinking. So just to be wary of that and to push back on that, right? So.
Thank you, Sam. Are there any other questions? I'm cognizant of our time here. It's 8:27. If anyone else had something specific, go ahead. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, this is just an observation, though, and it's in response to the comment made by Mr. Marks, I think, about parent advocacy. And when I think of recent immigrants coming to a country like Canada, they are very diffident. They say nothing. They don't want to rock the boat. They don't want to be seen as, troublemakers and so on. So really, you can't expect too much from them. They are already starting from a point of disadvantage. Maybe later when they're, here for a while, but that diffidence will get in the way of them participating. Now, the thing, what was also striking was that Mr. Mark said that when he goes to visit the parents, they have a lot to say. But when they enter schools, they are foreigners, really, and they feel like that. So their contribution is minimal because of that. I think that's what I have been picking up.
You know what, I'm going to just respond. I agree to quite a degree with both comments, Sam's too. I will say, though, that of the students I've been dealing with, for whatever reason, just maybe they're freaks of demographics the last couple of years, but a lot of them are very highly educated professionals in other countries, and I've got more than a couple of parents who are actually teachers in Dubai, for example, this year, and are actually quite articulate in expressing what they need. But you're right. There is a assimilation time, and yeah, they've got other things on their plate. Absolutely true.
So let me take I'm so sorry. Let me take a second and thank the panel, Mr. Montague, Mr. Marks, and Mr. Teckle. Thank you so much for your wonderful feedback. So as we begin to wrap up the evening, I know everyone is sort of rushing to get home. If I can say really quickly before I introduce Didi Kayet to give us our closing remarks, I think it's important for us to remember that change is possible. Movement is possible. I think one of the things I learned when I first got into the field, I ran into someone who later became my mentor, and he said to me, "Who are you?" And here I was, 21 years old, with this man walking up to me, never met him, saying, "Who are you?" And he said to me, "If you've come into this field trying to save the world, get out now." And I thought, okay, I need to just stop. But if you come into this world and into this work recognizing that you can impact one life at a time, you're going to be successful. Because for every life that we touch, for every student life that we change, we may have changed an entire family. And I think it's so important that when we start seeing all the statistics and we start thinking, why the hell should we continue, to recognize that we do touch lives and we do touch students and we do make a difference. And I'm looking at some of the work that we're doing at Humber College, where we're seeing Black students in a specialized program that we've developed for them with about an 80% graduation rate. And it's not just about graduating from diploma programs, it's graduating from diploma programs and going on to degree programs. So it is doable, it's possible, but we do have to make the commitment to it. So folks, let me introduce Didi Kayat, who is going to give us our closing remarks for the evening. And thank you all so much.
Hi, everyone. I'm actually here to read to you the closing remarks of Aparna Professor Mishra Tark, who was taken sick like last night. So she wanted me to do the honors, and it's in that spirit that I'm going to be reading what she wrote. And before I begin the closing remarks, she wanted me to make sure to acknowledge the work of Professor Carl James and the York Center for Education and Community. I want to thank the panelists for doing an amazing job, and I'd like to thank Beverly Jean Daniels for doing a great job as MC. And here's what she wrote. Dr. Patrick Solomon's legacy for urban diversity comes to a circle with a wonderful address given by Dr. Evans tonight. As they were close collaborators for many years, it's fitting that this celebration be aligned with the CSC annual lecture. The urban diversity has been many things to many people throughout its 20-year history. It has seen many students, course directors, and faculty pass through its classrooms. The program has been located in 4 venues: at York University, in a school in the neighborhood, a community center and close by, and now at back at New York University. Patrick was very committed to having teacher education be in the community, and our time at Yorkgate was one of the most vibrant and exciting school experiences for both the students and the faculty. We have been very fortunate to have great support from the Faculty of Education and our colleagues throughout the last 20 years. We held the view that urban diversity belongs to each one of us. No single vision or agenda drove the program. We did not always agree philosophically, but all team members worked hard to support students to achieve the highest standard in the program. And this hard work has paid off. We have students who have gone to grad school, received their master's, and got their PhD. A couple of former students are professors now. Other students are working for NGOs and the community organizations. A few are novelists and writers. 2 students ran for office in the mayoral elections. We have students who are teaching in many, many schools across Ontario. Some are principals, others equity representatives or curriculum experts and exemplary teachers. We have had some sadness as well with the untimely loss of former urban diversity grad Abshir Hassan, who embodied every principle of the urban diversity in his work in Lawrence Heights. And for Abshir and for all of our grads, we at the faculty remain ever more committed and determined to work for justice through service and to the communities. The bounty of talent, determination, and fairness of people and people power has stretched far and wide. With every new generation of teachers the program has supported, there has been more change in society and schools. The program has experimented with many theoretical and practical frameworks. Findings from from the use of these frameworks, such as community and culturally relevant teacher, post-colonial studies, and critical race theory, have found their way to top-ranked journals. The site has been the topic of investigation for research into teacher education and has been supported by a number of SSHRC grants, Social Science, Humanities, and Research Council grants. The model teacher education has been featured in professional articles and in the national news media. Urban diversity model of teacher education will be carried into the faculty's new 2-year program. So many of its elements and frameworks inform aspects of the new program, such as the community placement and the focus on praxis and research. The commitment to EDSJ is infused throughout. The program's commitment to access for all marginalized groups continues not only in teacher education, but now across all of our faculty program, from pre-service to doctoral studies. As well, students interested in urban environments will be encouraged to take the foundational course in urban education offered by the faculty. In the years to come, we are hoping to develop a program for those students that will recognize their commitment to working in under-resourced and densely populated schooling environments. As you can see, urban diversity has led to so many opportunities in and contributions to teacher education and student education. Its legacy will continue in the faculty's 2-year program through its influence and incredible models of equitable and just teacher education. Sometimes we used to complain to Patrick about the lack of visibility of the program amongst our colleagues and in the larger academic and teacher professional world. And he would say invariably, in the most kind and gentle way, quote, "Service in the name of justice is not noisy. It does not show off. It does not ask for glory. You have to do the work," unquote. And so we have to and we will do the work as we move into the next 20 years working for equity and social justice for all students in Ontario and beyond. Thank you. Those are Aparna's words.
So thank you to all. This brings our evening to a close. We do have little tokens of appreciation for those people who have participated who are not part of York. And I want to thank the panel members very much for their contributions. And of course, thank you to Professor Evans for a very inspirational talk that brought us all back to thinking through these notions of equity, social justice, the legacy of Patrick, and how we can carry these ideas forward. So thank you to everyone. Please eat some things on your way out, and we'll see you next year at the annual lecture.